The Mishnah Pirkei Avot tells us the two types of love. There's love which is contingent on something, and there's love which is contingent on nothing other than the person being somebody special. And what are examples of each of these situations? There's a story, King David had two children, which halachically were not related to one another, but biologically they were both his children. And they fell in love with one another. And the man's name was Amnon, and the sister, the biological sister, name was Tamar. She was beautiful, and he wanted to marry her. And they were very attracted to one another. And she said to him, "I'm happy to marry you, but I can't marry without our father's consent." King David, Amnon suspected that King David would not endorse it. So he had a friend who was a unseemly character. Says, "I'll tell you how to do it. Feign that you're sick, you're not well. And your sister, being so dedicated to you, she'll tend to all your physical needs. And once you have her in your room, you force yourself upon her. And once you rape her, on the QT, she'll marry you without the consent of her father." What did he do? That's exactly what he did. He created a level of animosity between the two of them that literally she could not tolerate him and she wanted nothing to do with him. So all this so-called, this bubble finally bursts and they hate one another. Why? Because initially, what was the basis for the love? Because she's willing to give herself to him. But the moment he realized that it's not going to be, the love immediately evaporated. Because that's love which is determined, contingent on something. Once the something is no longer there, there's no love. It's like a person's very wealthy. And he throws banquets, picks up the tab. Center of attraction, because he has a lot of money. The moment he loses his money, nobody's interested in coming to him. Because what was the attraction? He was willing to accommodate whoever was associated with him. Once that accommodation is not there any longer, it's over. But Yonatan and King David, Yonatan was the son of King Saul, who was a prince, and David, they were brothers-in-law. They loved one another. Because David recognized how special Jonathan was, Yonatan was, and Yonatan recognized how special David was. That's cleave. That's a love which is not contingent on anything, but recognizing how special the other person is. It's not what he has to offer, it's what he is. And when you recognize somebody's uniqueness in a special way, you're attracted to that person. So that love is not dependent because you've done for me. You've done nothing for me. But I recognize you as being a special person. I want to be associated with you because you have these special qualities, which are one of a kind. A man marries a woman. She doesn't have material financial to offer, anything financial, but she's one of a kind of woman, a quality of person, her integrity, her intellect. What could she do for you? Doesn't make what she do. She is. Recognizing that she's unique and special, if she's agreeable to marry you, want to marry her. And she recognizes who you are. And each of you recognize the innate qualities in each of you, even though it doesn't manifest itself in material wealth or any acknowledgement in the world, doesn't make a difference. Because if you are special and I understand who you are, I want to be with you. And she says, I want to be with you. That's there, the love does not emanate because what you offer, but rather because what you are. That's the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. So until now, this work was speaking about why a person should love God. If you'd only recognize what God provides for you, your life, your health, your material, your protection, you love him. But that's love which is contingent because he's provided, he's your provider, he's your benefactor. What about a person who doesn't have a good day in his life? Tzaddik v'ralo. There's certain devoutly righteous people, every day is worse than the next. But because of their understanding of God, they serve him faithfully, fully dedicated, selflessly. Why? Because they recognize who he is. He's the creator. And he has his reason why he's giving them the short end of the stick. And they don't question. And it's not because they're fools. Because they understand if this is the creator and he could create this world which borders on the infinite, he is something which there's nothing comparable to what he is. I want to have a relationship with him. I want to get to know him better. I want to be attached to him. I want to cleave to him. I want to dedicate my life to him. That's love, which is not contingent on anyone. But that you have to be a little bit of a person who has deep perception and evaluation of evaluating that it's not only what you receive, but rather what you see, what you understand. So if a person understands God at that level, that understanding will generate a love which surpasses the love which is the contingent on what? On what he provided you as your benefactor. Because one day, if it doesn't go right, you get a curveball, they say, God, what's going on over here? I've just given charity. Why did I have a financial setback? Right away, you got questions. Because everything is dependent on what he does or what he doesn't do. The other person has nothing to do with what he does or what he doesn't do. It's what he is. And because the other person, his relationship is based on what God is, therefore, he doesn't have a bad day in terms of his understanding of why he wants to be connected to God himself. One of the great Torah sages who passed away maybe 35 years ago, his name was Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, Zecher Tzadik Livrocha, blessed memory. He was a colleague of Rav Moshe Feinstein. Zecher Tzadik Livrocha was a colleague of my Rosh Yeshiva. They're all part of the same group. And Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky came from Russia. Rav Moshe Feinstein came from Russia. They all came from, my Rosh Yeshiva came from Russia. So they all spoke Russian. And when there was Glasnost, and many Russians came to the United States, so the Russians, they landed in Kennedy Airport, and Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, being one of the elderly Torah sages there, he wanted to meet the first Russians coming off the plane. And the only language they spoke, majority was only Russian. Some of them, as children, because they lived at the time of the Russian Revolution, they saw their grandmothers, and their grandmothers spoke Yiddish. So a number of them spoke Yiddish. The vast majority only spoke Russian. So Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, coming from Russia, he was able to converse with them in their language. So he meets this elderly Russian, and this elderly Russian was born before the Russian Revolution. And he says to him, when you grew up in your parents' home, were you taught anything Jewish, anything about Judaism? Did you ever hear the words, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad? Did you ever hear those words? He says, never heard them. Did you ever hear the words, Modani lefonecha, Mel Chai v'kayam, she'echzad to be nishmasi, when you wake up in the morning, you thank God that you're alive. Did you ever hear that? He says, no, I never heard that. He says, do you know anything about the Torah? He says, there's one verse I know. What verse do you know? Al Hashem avodat Hashem Elokecho b'simchu tu b'leivov. In the curses in the book of Devarim, Deuteronomy, it says, why will all the curses come upon you? Because you did not serve God mituv leivov, b'simchu b'tuv leiv, with joy and full-heartedness, mirov kol, although God gave you everything. Asher lo avodat Hashem Elokecha b'tuv leivov, b'simchu tuv leiv, mirov kol. So he was like shocked. I mean, Shema Yisrael, which is almost generic. Modani, which also. the verse which very few people know by heart, that's the verse you know. He says, how do you know that verse? He says, I'll tell you the story. He says, I was in Auschwitz during World War II. I was in the concentration camp, and there was a rabbi there. And because he was a special rabbi, the Nazis, they wanted to make his life intolerable. But what did they do? They gave him a 50-pound sack of salt here, and they wet it with water so it should even be heavier. And they had him carried on his back up and down a hill all day long, just to break him, and eventually he should just die from being overworked. And every time he would come down the hill, and then make the trek back up, he would give a sigh, and he would say to himself out loud, why has this come upon me? Because we did not serve God correctly, with joy. That's why we're experiencing this right now. And I heard him say it hundreds and hundreds of times, that verse. And because I heard him say that verse, therefore I know it's committed, it's engraved in my mind. See, he heard when Rabbi Kalatsky heard that this person, although he's being tortured, he attributes it to divine justice. He says, who was this man? This man must be a living angel. He says, you know what this man was? It was the Klausenberger Rebbe. That's who he was. Who was the Klausenberger Rebbe? He was a man who knew the Torah's entirety. He had a dynasty of Hasidim, thousands and thousands. He had a wife and 11 children, and they were all murdered by the Nazis. Yeah? And after experiencing this and now suffering in a concentration camp, what does he attribute everything to? Why is he experiencing what he's experiencing? Even now being tortured? I did not serve God sufficiently, with joy, with everything. I served him begrudgingly. That's why I'm experiencing this. You tell me, a person whose love of God, or understanding of God is based upon, because I'm a beneficiary of his unlimited goodness and kindness, is it possible to even say those words? So how does a man, after losing a wife and 11 children, and a community of thousands of followers, and other Jews being murdered and being annihilated, how do you say that? You know what the answer is? Because his understanding of God has nothing to do with what God gave him. His understanding was who God is. God being the creator, and he's a person who knew the Torah's entirety. He was one of the leading Torah sages, pre-World War II. His understanding of God through his study of Torah, he understood who God is. When you understand who God is, this is reverence. My attachment, my dedication, and my submission to him is because who he is. It's not because what he gives me. That was the Klausenberger Rebbe. Certain sect of Hasidim, they're called Bobav Hasidim. Bobav Hasidim. They originally were in Krakow in Europe. And again, the majority of the Hasidim were murdered by the Nazis in Poland. And when the rabbi came with a few of his children, he lived on the west side of Manhattan, and he had some of his Hasidim already with the Nazis. They bought him a brownstone on the west side, and that's where he set up his residence. And he had a minyan in this brownstone. And in those days, this is like the late 40s, he couldn't even get a minyan together. Couldn't get 10 Jews to come pray in his house. So he would stay on what in those days they call it the stoop. They would stand on the stoop, and they say, excuse me, could you please come in and help us with a minyan? And they would ask people to come join the minyan. So there's this one person who came from a very wealthy family. They were traditional but not observant. And he used to come and make the minyan. He was a man then, maybe 20 years old, and very wealthy. And the person himself held quite a bit about himself, because I'll tell you where it's going. And he made the minyan. And when he came in, the rabbi would speak to him. The rabbi was a nice man. And again, rabbi lost a good part of his family his wife. He only came with a few children. Most of his chassidim were no longer here. And he had to reestablish everything here in the United States. This is in let's say, 1948, 49. Fast forward, 1970. This rabbi is in Brooklyn. Right now, he has thousands and thousands of chassidim. Rebuilt everything. Followers. So this person who has a few bucks in his pocket, I thought was only traditional. He says he hadn't seen the rabbi since 1949. He'd like to visit him. So he finds out where he is in Brooklyn, travels to Brooklyn, and he lives in this very beautiful home, not this little walk-up, brownstone walk-up. And he comes in, he says, now the rabbi has a secretary. You can't see the rabbi unless you make an appointment. Just can't drop in and say, I want to see the rabbi. Comes in, sees hundreds of people waiting to see the rabbi to get his blessing. He shows up, pushes his way to the head of the line. He says, I'd like to see the rabbi. The man barely looks observant. So he says, who are you? I'm so-and-so. He says, what's your relationship? I'm an old friend of the rabbi's. Instead, with the whole 1970, things have changed. The rabbi's so many years older, plus we're talking about thousands of followers today. He regained his prominence among his chassidim. He says, I'd like to see the rabbi. They say, I'm sorry, can't see him. You got to make an appointment. And yet we have to know what you want to speak to him about. We don't want you to waste his time. This and that. I was offended. So he comes to me, and this guy had quite a few bucks in his pocket. And he says to me, this guy only got married, he was in his mid-50s. You understand? Because this guy gave away ice in the winter. Even that, he hesitated. And he says, the rabbi doesn't want to. You don't understand. That you knew George Washington because you wore white socks with him, and now he's president of the United States, you think you can see him tomorrow? He's a different station in life. Just because you rub shoulders with him then, he's a different person. Don't you understand who he is and you are? You don't understand who he is. That's why you feel offended. Finally did go see him. The rabbi treated him very nicely. But he got through all the, he got through all the barriers. But this guy thought, me, I made the minyan. He owes it to me. The rabbi owes you nothing. Maybe you owe it to the rabbi that even let you in his house, that he was able to talk a few words with you. God owes it to you. And if he gives you the short end of the stick, you're upset. God. If that's the relation, God says, something, you can pack your bags and at least take a hike. That's what you can do. But if you understand who God is, you could lose, God forbid, he lost a wife, 11 children, thousands of chassidim who were murdered by that monster, Hitler, Yimach Shmo, and his group. We fell short of where we should have been. If we would have served them, God wouldn't have allowed it to happen. But how do we understand it? Because he understood who God was, but only because of his dimension of understanding of Torah and knowledge and breadth and depth of personality was he able to embrace this, which other people couldn't. It's all based upon, what did you give me recently? What have you given me last? That's the difference.